It was an unusually hot Saturday morning in July when I finally decided to drain my backyard pool. The chlorine had been sitting stagnant for over a month, the pump had stopped working weeks ago, and the water had taken on a cloudy, greenish tint that made it look more like a swamp than anything you'd want to swim in. I had delayed the job long enough, mainly because I dreaded the work. But that morning, fueled by strong coffee and a rare sense of motivation, I grabbed the sump pump and started the process. The hose was snaked from the pool across my lawn and into the storm drain at the edge of my driveway, just like I'd seen countless neighbors do before me. As the water started to gurgle its way out, I felt an odd satisfaction watching the murky liquid swirl down the drain, one of those oddly satisfying chores that finally get done after weeks of procrastination. I didn't know at the time that this simple act would spiral into one of the most ridiculous neighbor confrontations of my life. The kind that sounds like it belongs in a sitcom or a Reddit post, labeled "Am I the A*****?" But there I was, 30 minutes later, standing shirtless with a wrench in one hand, and a confused expression on my face as my neighbor Karen, yes, a real-life Karen, burst out of her house like she was storming a battlefield. Her hair was half in curlers, she wore a pink bathrobe and mismatched slippers, and she was yelling at the top of her lungs. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched, pointing dramatically at the hose. I was so startled I almost dropped my wrench. Draining my pool," I answered, a bit unsure why that warranted a neighborhood emergency. She stomped across the street, waving her arms like she was directing air traffic, and launched into a full-blown tirade about how I was destroying the local ecosystem and polluting the water table. Words she clearly didn't fully understand but used with the passion of someone who once read a Facebook post about environmentalism. I tried to explain that the water was treated and being sent into a legal storm drain, the same way the city guidelines actually recommend you do it, but she wasn't having any of it. "I'm calling the police," she screamed. "You're literally committing an environmental crime." That phrase still rings in my ears because of how absurd it was. Before I could say anything else, she turned around, stormed back into her house, and within minutes was standing in her yard again, this time on the phone with what I could only assume was 911. She was yelling loud enough for me to hear every word. "Yes, I'd like to report an environmental hazard. My neighbor is dumping toxic chemicals into our groundwater." I looked around to see if anyone else was witnessing this circus, and sure enough, a few heads had started to peek out from windows and front porches. My next-door neighbor, Greg, was standing in his driveway, coffee mug in hand, grinning like he'd just bought tickets to a comedy show. "You okay over there?" he called out, clearly enjoying the drama. "I think so," I said, "unless I'm being arrested for draining pool water." Greg chuckled and shook his head. "Classic Karen," he said. "Last month, she threatened to call the fire department because I was grilling too close to her fence." Meanwhile, Karen was pacing like a general preparing for war, still on the phone, shouting buzzwords like pollution, EPA, and children's safety with increasing hysteria. I could tell the dispatcher on the other end was probably trying to talk her down, maybe even muting the phone to laugh with coworkers, but she was determined. By the time the first patrol car showed up 15 minutes later, I was sitting in a lawn chair next to the pump, sipping lemonade and scrolling through my phone. The officer stepped out, looking more confused than concerned, clearly expecting something far more dangerous than a middle-aged guy watering his curb with pool water. "We got a call about some kind of environmental emergency?" he asked, looking around like he was expecting to find barrels of toxic waste. "Yeah," I said, pointing to the hose. "I'm draining my pool." He blinked, looked at the hose, then back at me. "And the emergency is—" "You'll have to ask her," I said, nodding toward Karen, who was now marching toward us with a binder in her hands, presumably full of printed-out web pages from Google searches like, "Is chlorine bad for soil?" The officer took a deep breath and turned to face the storm. As Officer Daniels, his NAMA tag confirmed his identity, turned to face Karen. She wasted no time launching into a monologue that made her earlier outburst look like polite, small talk. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man is releasing chemicals, literal toxins, into our neighborhood drainage system. Do you know what this could do to our water table, our soil, our children?" She slapped the binder dramatically, like she'd just submitted it to the Supreme Court. The officer, bless him, remained calm as he glanced between her and the hose, which by now had reduced to a slow trickle. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to lower your voice," he said politely, "and please explain to me exactly what law you believe is being broken here." Karen looked personally offended at the request for rationality. "It's common sense," she shouted. "He's draining a whole swimming pool. Where do you think that water goes? Into the street? The drains. Straight into the earth. That's municipal contamination." I looked it up. She shoved the binder into his hands with the urgency of someone disarming a bomb. The officer opened it, flipped through a few of the printouts, and gave a slow, almost painful nod. "Ma'am," he began, with the patience of someone who'd clearly dealt with her before, "chlorinated pool water, when drained correctly into a storm drain, is not considered hazardous. In fact, it's how the city recommends homeowners dispose of old pool water. This isn't a crime." Karen blinked like she had just been slapped. But it's chemicals. Chlorine, that kills things. Yes, the officer replied, in concentrated amounts. But this is diluted, treated water. As long as it's been dechlorinated and properly drained, it poses no threat. Also, he turned slightly to give her a professional but clearly tired look. This drain is part of the city's stormwater system. It doesn't go into our drinking water or anyone's personal groundwater. It flows into a filtration channel. You can call Public Works if you'd like to verify. That word verify hit Karen like a ton of bricks. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Her hands flailed in the air as she tried to recalibrate her argument. But, my roses, my garden, the birds, she gasped. What if it seeps into the soil and kills the earthworms? What if we get a drought because of this? That's when Greg couldn't take it anymore. He let out an audible snort from his driveway. I looked over and saw he was now sitting in a lawn chair of his own, legs crossed, enjoying the show like it was Saturday morning cartoons. Karen whipped around like she'd been betrayed by an audience member. Oh, of course. You'd think this is funny, Greg. You overwater your lawn every other day. You're part of the problem. Greg raised his coffee mug in salute. Cheers to being problematic, he said, which only further enraged her. Officer Daniels gave me a look that was half amused, half exhausted, then turned back to Karen. Ma'am, unless you can show me a specific ordinance that's being violated, I have no reason to take further action. Your neighbor hasn't broken any laws. If you still have concerns, you're welcome to follow up with city services, but as far as I'm concerned, this is a known issue. Karen looked devastated. Her righteous crusade had just been shut down by the very authority she had summoned to fight for her cause. She let out a noise that sounded like a cross between a scoff and a whimper, spun on her heel, and stomped back toward her house, binder still clutched in her arms like a wounded pet. The officer turned to me with a slight shrug. Sorry about that, he said. Some folks just need something to be mad about. No worries, I replied. You want a lemonade? I've got an extra. He chuckled. No thanks. I still have to write a report. Believe it or not, this counts as a call response. He tipped his cap and walked back to his car. As he drove off, I glanced around the neighborhood. A few curtains quickly dropped back into place. Greg gave me a thumbs up. The hose had finished its job. The pool was empty, the sun was high, and I suddenly felt like I'd just completed a battle I never signed up for. Just as I was about to pack up, Karen reappeared in her window, holding a phone up and clearly recording me. Great. Now I was being turned into some kind of viral TikTok villain. I sighed, waved to her camera, and yelled, Smile, Karen. The internet loves drama. She slammed the curtain shut. I figured that once the police left and the pool was drained, things would calm down. I had seriously underestimated Karen's commitment to escalation. By that evening, she had posted not one but 3 different rants in our neighborhood Facebook group, Oakwood Neighbors United No Politics. Please, each one more unhinged than the last. The first post was a photo of my empty pool, captioned, This is what domestic eco-terrorism looks like. The second showed a close-up of the storm drain with a dramatic filter, and the words, Toxins, start here. And the third was a blurry screenshot of a YouTube video she had apparently uploaded, titled, I kid you not, local man dumps poison into our streets, and no one stops him, It had 12 views, 3 of which were probably mine, because I couldn't believe it was real. The comments under her Facebook posts were a mix of support and mockery. A few other neighborhood Karens in training expressed concern and posted vague comments like, wow, unbelievable, or what is this world coming to? While others chimed in with sarcastic replies like, thoughts and prayers for the endangered worms and someone called David Attenborough. Greg, of course, commented, just be glad he didn't use salted pool water. That would have summoned the demons. She deleted that comment almost immediately, but not before taking a screenshot and labeling it as bullying in a follow-up post. I stayed quiet through all of it. Let her vent. Let her stew. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd run out of steam. But the next morning, things got even weirder. A notice was taped to my door, an official-looking envelope with the Oakwood Homeowners Association logo printed on the front. I opened it, heart already sinking, and sure enough, Karen had filed a formal complaint. Violation of Section 4.7, Improper Water Disposal. She claimed I had drained toxic water containing harmful industrial chemicals into a community-adjacent storm drain, and that I had created a potential environmental and safety hazard. She even attached pictures, including a blown-up printout of the video still, where I'm standing in my yard holding a hose and looking like I'm plotting the downfall of civilization. The HOA demanded a written explanation within 7 days and warned that fines or even a hearing could follow. I laughed out loud, an actual full-body laugh, then marched straight to Greg's house with the notice in hand. She went full HOA on me, I said, waving the letter. We knew she would, Greg said. Karen loves rules the way cats love laser pointers. She'll chase them around all day just to feel alive. He invited me in, poured us both a coffee, and helped me draft a formal reply to the HOA that included links to the actual city guidelines on pool draining. I even attached an email I got from Public Works that morning confirming that what I did was not only legal but encouraged. so long as the water was dechlorinated, which it was. I submitted the reply online that afternoon and assumed that would be the end of it. Again, I was wrong. 2 days later, a local news van pulled into the neighborhood. Bright blue logo on the side. Channel 9. Your voice, your news. I was inside eating a sandwich. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find a young woman with perfect hair, a cameraman, and a microphone. "Hi, we're doing a quick story on neighborhood environmental concerns," she said, cheerful and polished. "We were contacted by a resident here who claims there's illegal dumping happening in the storm drains. Can we ask you a few questions?" I blinked at her, then burst out laughing. "Let me guess," I said. "Karen sent you." She hesitated for just a second, which confirmed it. "I can't disclose our source," she said diplomatically, "but you're welcome to give your side of the story." So I did. I walked them through the process, showed them the email from the city, the HOA complaint, and even let them record a shot of my now empty pool. "As you can see," I said to the camera, "I followed every city regulation. If this is illegal, I guess we're all criminals. I hope my pool filter doesn't become a federal case." They aired the segment the same evening. It was only 2 minutes long, and while Karen got her say in a dramatic voiceover, complete with barrel of her roses swaying in the wind like endangered species, the story was ultimately fair. It ended with a quote from the city's Department of Water Management saying there was no evidence of wrongdoing and no laws broken. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She uploaded the segment to her YouTube channel under the title, News, Cover-Up Protects Local Polluter. She added ominous music in the background. I'll admit, the editing was impressive. The delusion, even more so. By the end of that week, I figured Karen had exhausted all possible avenues for her eco-crusade. She'd involved the police, the HOA, the neighborhood Facebook group, and even the local news. I mean, what was left contacting Greenpeace? But, naturally, I underestimated her again. On Saturday morning, I stepped outside to find a folded flyer wedged into my mailbox, and about 24 more scattered awkwardly along driveways up and down the street. At first glance, I thought it was just a lost pet notice or one of those pest control ads. But no, it was a petition. The header, printed in all caps, in Comic Sans, yes, Comic Sans, read, "Protect our water, stop toxic neighbor dumping." Underneath was a photo of me again, the same infamous shot of me holding the hose like it's a weapon, and a bullet list of grievances. It claimed I had knowingly introduced chemical runoff into the local ecosystem, put neighborhood, children and pets at risk, and threatened the horticultural balance of Oakwood. Horticultural balance? Who talks like that? Then, in bold red letters, sign below to demand an HOA hearing and a fine of no less than $500. There were 10 signature lines underneath, and to my surprise and slight horror, 4 of them were already filled out. One was Karen's, obviously. The others belonged to a few of the usual suspects. Mrs. Linton, who hated noise past 8 p.m. Harold, who once complained that Halloween decorations were a pagan insult to property values. And Debbie from 2 doors down, whose dog poops in everyone's yard but who still thinks she's queen of the block. I stood there holding the flyer, trying to decide whether to laugh or scream. In the end, I just walked it over to Greg's place. He was trimming his hedges, earbuds in, and when I waved the petition in his face, he pulled one butt out and said, "Oh God, what now?" "She made a petition," I said. "You're kidding?" "Nope." I handed it to him. He read the title and let out a slow, incredulous laugh. "Toxic neighbor, dumping what am I? An oil rig?" "Apparently, yes." Greg shook his head and muttered something about needing more beer for this neighborhood. That afternoon, I decided to finally respond not with another letter or another Facebook comment, but with something that would hit Karen where it hurt. Facts. I created my own flyer, titled, Pool Water Panic, The Truth versus the Drama. I included the city's actual water disposal, guidelines highlighted, underlined, the email from Public Works, and screenshots from Karen's video with sarcastic captions like dramatic music added by author, and no earthworms were harmed in the making of this drainage. I even added a short FAQ. Is draining pool water into a storm drain illegal? A. No.Q. Can diluted chlorine harm the water? Table A. Not unless you're draining a hotel-sized pool directly into a well, which I WASN single quotes T.Q. Why is Karen so angry? A. We're still working on that one. Then I printed 50 copies and hand-delivered them to every mailbox on our street. It felt petty. It was petty, but God, it was satisfying. Over the next 24 hours, things shifted dramatically. The same neighbors who had quietly watched from behind blinds started chiming in. I got texts from people I barely knew saying things like, "Thanks for clearing that up," and "Karen needs a new hobby." One person even taped my flyer to their window with the words #TeenPoolDrain written across the bottom. Karen, of course, went ballistic. She accused me of harassment by misinformation and claimed I had mocked her concerns instead of addressing them respectfully. She wrote a 4th Facebook post, yes, 4th, in which she compared herself to Aaron Brockovich. "Sometimes," she wrote, "when you stand up to the powerful, you get mocked. But justice always wins." Someone commented, Is he powerful because he owns a hose? And that reply got 42 likes before she took the whole post down. But the worst, or maybe funniest, twist came Monday morning. I was sipping coffee and scrolling through emails when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find two city employees in bright orange safety vests and hard hats. One held a clipboard, the other held a water testing kit. "Good morning, sir," said the clipboard guy. "We're responding to a complaint about potential hazardous runoff at this address." I blinked. "Let me guess," I said. "Karen." He glanced at his sheet and gave a wry smile. "We're not at liberty to say, but we do need to test the storm drain outside." I led them to the curb and watched as they ran their tests. It took all of 15 minutes. The results, of course, came back normal. No contamination, no unusual chemicals, no aquatic genocide. The guy with the clipboard even laughed. "This is cleaner than the stuff that comes out of most lawn sprinklers," he said. They filed their report, thanked me for my time, and left. I stood there watching them go, wondering what Karen's next move could possibly be now that even the city had sided with me. Of course, I'd soon find out. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. After the city inspectors left with nothing but clean test results and mild amusement, I felt like I had finally, definitively won. It was the bureaucratic mic drop Karen couldn't ignore, hard evidence that her hysteria was built on sand. For about 48 hours, things were quiet. No new Facebook rants, no HOA letters, no passive-aggressive glares from across the street. I even started to believe that, maybe, just maybe, she'd accepted defeat and crawled back into the social shadows. But if there's one thing I've learned living across from Karen, it's that silence doesn't mean surrender, it means plotting. Sure enough, the calm broke in the most unexpected, deliciously ironic way possible. It started with a smell, not a faint one either, a pungent nose wrinkling, what did in the sin kind of stink, that drifted through the neighborhood like invisible fog. At first I thought maybe it was a dead animal under someone's porch, or maybe Greg had over-fertilized his lawn again, but by midday, the stench had intensified, and the source became horrifyingly obvious. Karen's yard, specifically, her garden beds, the same garden beds she'd paraded as an example of delicate suburban ecology being threatened by my pool drainage. They now reeked like a sewer, and the once pristine flowers were wilting dramatically, as if they, too, had given up hope. Greg wandered over, shirtless, sipping lemonade, and gestured toward the tragic scene across the street. "You smell that?" he said. "Smells like irony." We both stared as Karen came out with a watering can and an industrial-sized jug of something labeled organic super soil activator, ultra concentrated. She was pouring it directly onto the mulch while wearing gardening gloves and a surgical mask. "Oh no," I muttered. "She's gone full mad scientist." Later that day, I got a text from Rachel, another neighbor 3 houses down, an unofficial queen of neighborhood gossip. It read, "Photo attached of Karen's garden. She dumped 5 gallons of that DIY compost tea crap she makes from old food scraps. I think something fermented wrong. HOA already got 2 complaints." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. The garden Karen had fought to protect from my toxic pool crime was now ground zero for an actual health code violation. The next morning, I woke up to find yellow flags stuck in her lawn, official city inspection markers. Apparently, someone, not me, I swear had reported the odor as a potential gray water misuse issue. City workers had arrived in the early hours, taken soil samples, and advised Karen to cease all fertilization until the test results were back. She tried arguing with them on her front porch, still in that damn pink bathrobe, binder under one arm, but this time her authority was clearly gone. She wasn't the eco-warrior anymore. She was the eccentric neighbor stinking up the block, and the internet was not kind to her either. Somehow, and I will forever owe Rachel for this. A clip from Karen's YouTube video made its way onto TikTok, but not just any part. It was the most dramatic line. "This man is single-handedly endangering the entire local ecosystem." Only someone had edited it over footage of me watering my sidewalk, followed by a dramatic explosion graphic and the caption, "When you drain your pool and accidentally start the apocalypse." The video blew up, thousands of views, hundreds of comments. Most people assumed it was satire. A few thought it was some kind of performance art, but everyone agreed. Karen was the villain, and she was wildly over. Within 2 days, someone had found her YouTube channel and started commenting, "Free the pool guy" on every video. Another user edited a photo of her garden with gas masks, photoshopped onto the flowers. Greg and I watched the chaos unfold, from our respective lawns like front row spectators at a very satisfying opera. The HOA, of course, finally had to act not against me, but against Karen. She received a formal warning citing improper waste use, neighborhood disruption, and failure to adhere to local composting standards. She had to pay a $150 fine and submit a soil remediation plan. The same woman who tried to fine me for draining a legally dechlorinated pool was now being fined for literally poisoning her The irony was so thick you could shovel it. Karen, naturally, claimed she was being targeted for her activism and hinted at a possible legal case, but nobody was listening anymore. Even the diehard HOA watchdogs had gone quiet. It was as if the entire neighborhood had silently agreed. Karen had become a cautionary tale, a suburban Greek tragedy, complete with hubris, collapse, and a rotting garden bed. And the best part? My pool was now sparkling clean, refilled, restored, chlorinated, just the right amount. I even got a new cover for it, one that says, in bold navy letters, "Caution, contains dangerous HO." Every time I walk past it, I smile, because if suburban warfare taught me anything, it's this. When someone wages war over water, ... it's only a matter of time before their side sinks. Just when I thought the saga had finally drifted into the awkward silence of suburban memory. A story that neighbors would chuckle about at block parties and whisper behind hedges. The HOA decided to fan the flames one last time. An email popped into my inbox with the subject line, "Special Community Meeting, Property Conduct, and Environmental Harmony Discussion." Environmental harmony. That had Karen's fingerprints all over it. The body of the email confirmed it. The board had received numerous communications regarding recent disputes over neighborhood environmental practices, and in the interest of unity, a mandatory meeting would be held the following Tuesday at 6 p.m. in the Oakwood community center. Refreshments, it added, would be provided as if stale cookies could soften the blow of this farce. Greg called me 5 minutes after it hit our inboxes. "You see this crap?" "Yeah, let me guess." Karen wrote the agenda in Comic Sans. "Wouldn't surprise me," he said. "I'm going. I've already got popcorn ready." When Tuesday rolled around, I showed up early just to get a seat in the back. I wasn't looking for drama, I just didn't want to be front and center for whatever speech Karen had surely prepared. The community center filled quickly. Couples, dog walkers, the Lintons with matching lawn-themed t-shirts, even that teenager who skateboards too close to everyone's driveways. All here. The folding chairs creaked under the weight of expectation. At 6:05 sharp, the HOA president, Mark, a wary-looking retiree who clearly regretted ever volunteering, stood up and gave a weak smile. "Thanks everyone for coming. I know tensions have been a bit high lately. We wanted to address concerns in a fair, respectful way. So tonight, both parties involved in the recent water-related incident will have the opportunity to speak." I sank lower in my chair. Greg elbowed me and whispered, "Oh boy, you're both parties now." Then, right on cue, Karen stood. She had a folder in one hand, a water bottle in the other, and the steely confidence of someone who'd practiced her speech in the mirror at least 20 times. She walked to the front of the room, turned to face the crowd, and launched into what can only be described as the most self-important TED Talk on water in suburban history. "We live in an ecosystem," she began solemnly. "An ecosystem that depends on every drop of water being treated with care. What happened on our street was not just about a pool, it was about respect. Respect for nature, for the future, for the children." She actually teared up on the word children. I could hear someone in the second row stifling a laugh. She went on to recount the incident, pulling out full-color charts about chlorine levels, printed screenshots from the local news segment. And I kid you not, a laminated quote she had attributed to Greta. "We must never stay silent when harm is being done," she declared, "even if it's by our neighbors." There was an awkward smattering of polite claps, followed by a long silence. Then Mark cleared his throat. "Thank you, Karen. Now, would the other party like to respond?" I really didn't want to, but Greg gave me a shove. So I stood, walked to the front, and said, "Hi, I'm the guy with the pool." A few chuckles. I went on. "Just to clarify, I followed all city guidelines, dechlorinated the water, and drained it legally into a storm drain. The city inspected it, found no violations, and in fact confirmed that this is the recommended way to dispose of pool water. So I'm not here to argue. I'm just asking politely that we don't turn basic homeowner maintenance into a neighborhood civil war." I paused. "Also, I'd like to thank Karen for making me internet famous. Apparently, I'm the face of aquatic destruction now." That got a full laugh from the room, even from Mark, who visibly relaxed. Karen did not laugh. She narrowed her eyes at me, like she was planning to file an emotional damage claim. Then the floor opened for discussion, which, surprisingly, didn't turn into a shouting match. A few neighbors voiced support for common sense rules. A few asked the HOA to be clearer about environmental standards. And one guy raised his hand just to say, "I don't care what anyone does with water, as long as nobody touches my grill." Relatable. In the end, the board promised to update the neighborhood guidelines to include clearer instructions for pool maintenance and composting practices. A not-so-subtle jab at Karen's rotting garden. The meeting adjourned with Mark saying, "Let's all try to be good neighbors," in that exhausted principal's voice that says, "Please never make me do this again." As we all filtered out, Greg slapped me on the back. "Well," he said, "I think you won." "Not sure it was a game," I replied. He grinned. "Then it's even better that you beat someone who thought it was." Karen walked out silently, binder clutched to her chest, head held high, but she knew. Everyone knew. Her war on water had ended, not with a bang, but with a room full of people, politely rolling their eyes. In the weeks following the Great Poolgate fiasco, life in Oakwood slowly returned to what passes for normal in suburban neighborhoods: quiet, neat, passive-aggressively peaceful. Lawns were mowed in perfect diagonal lines. Amazon packages vanished off porches without incident, and the community Facebook group went back to its usual programming: lost cats, garage sale announcements, and the occasional grumble about teenagers riding e-scooters too fast. Karen, to her credit, faded into the background, at least publicly. Her YouTube channel, once home to impassioned warnings about chlorinated doom, had gone silent. Her garden, still recovering from the organic super soil disaster, now featured fewer flowers and more mulch, nature's apology rug, and her once daily posts in the neighborhood group dwindled to polite one-liners about trash day reminders. Some said she was embarrassed. Others guessed she was quietly plotting her next crusade, perhaps against leaf blowers or decorative gnomes. Me, I didn't really care. My pool was full, my lawn was drama-free, and I'd even gotten a handwritten note in my mailbox from an anonymous neighbor that read, "Thank you for standing up to insanity. If this were Salem in 1692, she'd have had you burned for water." Witchcraft. I kept it on my fridge. Greg framed his copy, but the universe, being the ironic beast it is, wasn't quite finished with Karen or me. About a month after the HOA meeting, I came home from work to find a soggy cardboard box sitting on my porch. It had no return address, just my name in block letters. Inside was a plastic storage bin filled with pond water. At least that's what it looked like. It smelled like algae and disappointment. Floating inside were 3 laminated sheets. One had a photo of a duck with the caption, "This could have been saved." The second featured a quote, "The earth is not yours to poison." Anonymous. The third was a screenshot of my pool, zoomed in so tightly that it looked like satellite surveillance. There was no signature, no explanation, just weird, soggy, guilt, propaganda. Greg and I examined it like forensic scientists on a crime show. "Think it's from her?" he asked, poking the edge of the bin with a broom handle. "Who else mails you water in a Tupperware container? Could be performance art," he mused. "Or maybe she's pivoting to abstract activism." We eventually dumped the water out and used the container to store pool toys. Because, why not? I didn't even bother confronting her about it. Let her have her mystery protest. If a duck photo helped her sleep at night, so be it. The real full circle moment didn't come from Karen's antics, it came from her sprinkler system. 2 weeks after the strange water box incident, Greg texted me a photo at 7 a.m. It showed a geyser of water shooting 6 feet into the air from Karen's front yard. Apparently, her irrigation line had burst overnight, flooding her lawn and part of the sidewalk. City maintenance was already on the scene, and a caution, "Water shut off in progress," sign had been placed on her door. I walked over later that day to check it out, purely for the educational value. The water had carved a small trench through her hydrangeas and pooled along the edge of her driveway, forming what Greg later referred to as Lake Hypocrisy. Karen stood outside with a garden hose in hand, trying to flush dirt out of the cracks in her bricks. She looked up, saw me, and surprisingly didn't say anything. No glares, no binder, just a tired nod. I gave her one back. For a moment, we were just 2 homeowners dealing with water in very different, equally annoying ways. The funny thing is, that moment stuck with me more than the yelling, the police visit, or even the TikTok fame. It reminded me that as ridiculous as it all was, the drama, the theatrics, the lawn sign moralizing, we were still neighbors, stuck on the same block, sharing the same sidewalks, the same trash pickup days, the same awkward hellos when pulling out of the driveway. Maybe we'd never be friends. Maybe she'd always find something to crusade about, but at the very least, she had proven one thing beyond doubt. No one cares about water quite like Karen. Now, every time I drain the pool, I do it with a kind of reverence. Not because I'm worried about the environment, I still follow all the city guidelines, thank you very much. But because I know somewhere, behind closed curtains, a binder might be twitching with unease, and that's okay. We all need our little rituals. Mine just happens to involve chlorine. Hers, binders, laminated quotes, and the occasional garden apocalypse. But in the end, peace returned to Oakwood. The pool sparkled. The ducks, if they ever existed, were safe, and Karen, well, she finally stopped screaming about the water table. Now she just posts weekly updates about the dangers of LED porch lights and their effect on nocturnal bees. Progress. I guess.